Some Pokemon become icons the second you see them. Others make you wonder what the designers were thinking, what they were eating, and whether anyone in the room had the courage to say no.
No.
Every generation of Pokemon has given us absolute masterpieces. And every generation has also handed us something that should have stayed in the sketchbook. Today, we're going through all 9 generations and calling out the best and the worst from each one. Let's get the obvious one out of the way. Jynx is Generation 1's biggest design mistake, and not just for the reasons that made headlines.
Don't kiss me, okay? Cut it out! Please, no, Jinx, let go of it!
Strip away the controversy, and what are you actually left with? A humanoid Pokemon with no interesting battle identity. Ice and Psychic sounds like a powerful combination on paper, and then you actually use Jynx in battle.
Oh! Is it down and out?
Frail defenses, a shallow move pool, and a speed stat that only feels impressive until you remember what Generation 1 actually threw at you competitively. She got completely outclassed by Alakazam on the Psychic side and Lapras on the Ice side, 2 Pokemon that actually had something going for them. The worst part? She had a baby form added in Generation 2 as if anyone was asking for more Jynx. How does a Pokemon this forgettable get an entire extended family? To be fair, she's not completely without charm. Her appearance in the anime had some memorable moments, but as a Pokemon design meant to stand alongside Gengar, Alakazam, and Lapras, she just doesn't belong in the same conversation. And speaking of Gengar, there is a reason this Pokemon has been fan favorite for over 2 decades. Gengar isn't just a great design, it's a perfect design. That grin, that silhouette, the way it looks like pure mischief given physical form. But what makes Gengar the best of Generation 1 isn't just aesthetics. It's the complete package. Ghost and Poison typing gave it a mysterious identity at a time when Ghost types were genuinely rare and exciting. Its special attack stat made it a legitimate threat, and its evolution line, from the dopey little Ghastly to the creepy floating Haunter, tells a visual story that rewards you for paying attention. Gengar also has one of the best pieces of lore in the entire franchise. It's said to be the shadow of a Clefable. It lurks in dark corners waiting to steal your life force. This thing isn't just a Pokemon, it's a ghost story. And then they gave it a mega evolution that looked like pure nightmare fuel. For a second there, Gengar went from beloved to terrifying, and it earned every bit of it. Generation 1's best, no debate. Johto gave us Cyndaquil, Espeon, Umbreon, and Scizor. It also gave us Dunsparce, which is here to remind you that Game Freak has never once been afraid to waste a good concept. Dunsparce is supposedly based on the Tsuchinoko, a legendary snake from Japanese mythology. A creature so mysterious and elusive, it has entire festivals dedicated to its supposed existence. That is genuinely one of the coolest Pokemon inspirations imaginable. And what did they do with it? They made a chubby beige worm with tiny wings and a drill tail that learns Glare and Rage.
Everybody says my Dunsparce is bigger than your Dunsparce is. Well, they're wrong, because mine's definitely bigger. Mine's bigger. No, mine is. Here, I can measure them for you.
For 3 entire generations, this Pokemon sat in the background, occasionally remembered by players who stumbled into it by accident in Dark Cave and promptly released back into the wild. It had no evolution, no competitive presence, and no reason to exist beyond filling a slot in the Pokédex. Now, to be fair, they did eventually give Dunsparce an evolution in Generation 9. Dunsparce, which is just more Dunsparce longer, still beige, still confused. The Tsuchinoko deserve better. We all deserve better. Johto's best Pokemon is a masterclass in restraint. Every evolution before Umbreon was brightly colored, immediately readable, and tied to an obvious elemental type. And then Generation 2 introduced a black Eevee that glows in the dark, evolves only at night through friendship, and carries this quiet, melancholy energy that no other Pokemon in the franchise has ever quite matched. Umbreon doesn't need to be flashy. The yellow rings, the red eyes, the way it looks like it's always watching you from somewhere just outside your vision. This is elegant design doing more work than a dozen over-designed legendaries ever could. And in battle, Umbreon became one of the most infuriating walls in competitive Pokemon history. High HP, absurd special defense, access to Wish, and Toxic. This Pokemon has ended careers. It doesn't beat you dramatically, it just waits, and then you lose. Umbreon is the rare Pokemon that is simultaneously beloved by casual fans and feared by competitive players. That crossover appeal reveal is nearly impossible to pull off, and Johto nailed it. Generation 3 brought us Rayquaza, Salamence, Metagross, and Melodic. And it also brought us Luvdisc, which is shaped like a heart and does absolutely nothing with that premise. The concept is adorable on paper, a heart-shaped fish Pokemon that's associated with romance.
It's so cute.
Fine, you can work with that, except Game Freak didn't work with it at all. Luvdisc has a base stat total so low it barely functions as a Pokemon. Its move pool is essentially non-existent for anything competitive, and its entire role in the game is to be a source of heart scales, which means most players only ever encountered it as a farming target. It doesn't evolve, it doesn't have an interesting lore entry, it doesn't do anything notable in the story, it exists, and that is the full extent of its contribution to Generation 3. For years, fans assumed Luvdisc was meant to evolve into Alomomola in Generation 5, another heart-shaped water Pokemon. Game Freak denied it, which somehow makes it worse because it means they made two separate heartfish on purpose and gave neither of them a real reason to exist. Incredible, genuinely impressive in the worst way. Flygon never got the respect it deserved, and it still hasn't fully recovered from being overlooked. But make no mistake, this is one of the best Pokemon ever designed. Dragon and ground typing, a design inspired by antlions and desert mirages. Those iconic red eye covers. Flygon doesn't just look cool, it looks like it belongs in the world it comes from. You can feel the heat rising off the desert when you look at it. And then there's the lore. Flygon creates sandstorms by flapping its wings, and the sound it produces is said to be like singing. They literally called it the mystic Pokemon and said desert travelers who hear it feel an irresistible urge to walk toward it. This Pokemon is a siren of the desert. That is extraordinary writing for a creature most people benched in favor of Salamence. Flygon was also a legitimate threat in Generation 3 competitive play, fast, hard-hitting, and nearly impossible to predict because of how many roles it could fill. It never got a mega evolution despite years of fan campaigns, and that remains one of the great injustices of the franchise. But even without it, Flygon stands as Generation 3's finest. Generation 4 is often called the peak of Pokemon design. Garchomp, Lucario, Rotom, Sinnoh delivered on almost every front. And then there's Probopass, which looks like someone glued a mustache to a compass and called it a day. Nosepass was already one of Generation 3's more questionable designs, a walking Easter Island head with a magnetic nose. But at least Nosepass had a certain absurd charm to it. Probopass takes that and adds a handlebar mustache, 3 tiny satellite faces orbiting its body that makes it look like a geography teacher dressed as a magnet for Halloween. Steel and rock typing sounds usable, and it technically is. Probopass has solid defensive stats and saw occasional niche use. But competitive viability does not excuse the design. There is no world in which this was the best use of a Sinnoh evolution slot. Someone somewhere looked at Nosepass and thought, what if we made it worse and gave it a mustache? And nobody stopped them. If Pokemon had a Mount Rushmore, Garchomp is on it. Dragon and ground, pseudo-legendary, sand veil, speed that borders on disrespectful, an attack stat that turns battles into apologies. Garchomp is not just Generation 4's best Pokemon, it's one of the most dominant Pokemon ever introduced to the franchise, and its design is every bit as good as its stats. It looks like a fighter jet designed by evolution, shark DNA, jet wings, blade arms. Garchomp looks dangerous from every angle, and it fights exactly like it looks. Cynthia built her entire identity around this thing, and rightfully so. The moment her Garchomp came out in the champion battle is one of the most viscerally intimidating moments in franchise history. An entire generation of players knows exactly what it feels like to watch that health bar disappear. And then they gave it a mega evolution that somehow made it even more aggressive looking. At some point, the designers were just showing off. Generation 4's best, arguably the franchise's most complete non-legendary design ever made. Generation 5 took more criticism than it ever deserved, and most of that criticism unfairly centered on Pokemon like Vanillix, an ice cream cone Pokemon that people used as proof that Game Freak had run out of ideas. Here's the thing, the concept of an ice cream Pokemon isn't the problem. Pokemon has always pulled from everyday objects. Voltorb is a Pokeball. Magnemite is a magnet. The problem with Vanillix is that it commits fully to being a literal soft serve cone and adds nothing interesting on top of that premise. No interesting lore, no surprising typing, no unexpected competitive identity. It's just an ice cream cone that evolves into a bigger ice cream cone with 2 scoops. The creativity stops at the concept sketch. In a generation that gave us Chandelure, Golurk, Hydreigon, and Volcarona, Pokemon that took simple concepts and twisted them into something genuinely interesting, Vanillish stands out as a missed opportunity wearing a waffle cone. And since we're already talking about Generation 5, let's talk about what happens when Game Freak actually commits to a concept. Chandelure is a ghost haunting a chandelier. That's the pitch. And from that pitch, they built one of the most visually stunning and mechanically devastating Pokemon in the entire franchise. Ghost and fire typing is rare, atmospheric, and conceptually perfect. Fire as warmth, fire as a candle in a haunted mansion, fire that burns your soul instead of your body. Chandelure's Pokédex entry says it absorbs the spirit of anyone it hypnotizes with its swaying flames and incinerated the spirit, leaving only the body behind. And in battle, that special attack stat is genuinely obscene. Chandelure hits harder than most legendaries. Shadow Ball, Flamethrower, Energy Ball, it became a competitive staple almost immediately and never truly left. Best of Generation 5. And honestly, one of the best. To avoid making the video too long, I'm gonna give a quick overview of the remaining generations. 2 creatures stuck to a rock, they bicker constantly according to the Pokédex, that's the whole thing. Barbaracle at least looks interesting, Binacle looks like the concept art that was supposed to be scrapped. Dragon and Flying with a design built around sound waves and bat ears the size of satellite dishes. Noivern looks like it belongs in a heavy metal album cover, and it's somehow one of the most elegant Pokemon in the franchise. The contrast between its terrifying silhouette and its surprisingly expressive face makes it endlessly watchable. Bruxish is what happens when a designer opens the color palette and uses all of it at once. A psychic fish with grinding teeth and neon gradients from 3 different biomes. The concept of a tropical piranha with psychic powers is actually interesting. The execution looks like it was designed by a committee having a disagreement. A creature so lonely, it disguised itself as Pikachu to get anyone to love it. And its Pokédex entry says that looking at what's under the disguise can cause death. Mimikyu carries devastating lore, a compelling battle gimmick, and genuine emotional weight. It's the rare Pokemon that makes you feel something every time you see it. 6 tiny soldiers marching in formation with no individual identity, no evolution, and no presence. The military ant concept had potential. The execution is just a conga line with a helmet. A stealth bomber that launches its own children out of its head cannons like living missiles. Dragapult is absurd, fast, terrifying, and one of the best pseudo-legendaries in franchise history. The fact that it shoots its babies at enemies is the most chaotic Pokédex entry in years, and somehow that makes it better. Lechonk gets all the dog food baked into bread criticism, but at least Lechonk is charming. Daxpun is a bread dog. It doesn't do anything interesting with the baking concept, it doesn't have compelling lore, and in a generation with Gimmighoul, Palafin, and Iron Valiant, it disappears entirely. A ghost possessing a treasure chest, Gimmighoul has the kind of layered design, cross-platform lore, and genuine intrigue that the best Pokemon have always had. Its roaming form, just a tiny ghost carrying a coin, is one of the most quietly charming designs in the entire franchise. Every generation of Pokemon tells you exactly what the designers were excited about. 9 generations in, and Game Freak still hasn't figured out how to be consistently great. But when they get it right, there is nothing else in gaming that feels quite like it.